Welcome to Moonnest, where every night holds a hidden wonder. It's good to have you here. Tonight's story will lead you through a quiet world of dreams and forgotten places. Listen closely, and stay with us. The next story glows even brighter. Beneath a sky stretched wide with twilight, the stars blinked into view, one by one, like distant lanterns kindling in the dark. The world lay hushed and expectant, as if holding its breath, and the only sound was the whisper of leaves rustling against each other in secret conversations. It was on nights like these, when the air felt heavy with mystery and the moon hung low over the hills, that the starbound express would sometimes appear. Few had ever seen it, and fewer still believed the tales. But those who wandered alone beneath the canopy of night, whose hearts were weary with longing or whose dreams had grown threadbare with waiting, sometimes spoke of a light that shimmered on the horizon, not quite like moonlight, not quite like dawn. It would begin as a glimmer, faint and distant, a mere breath of radiance against the edge of the world. But as the moments stretched and the night deepened, it would draw nearer, the shimmer growing into a cascade of light that rippled like waves upon the surface of a midnight sea. Its arrival was silent, smooth as a sigh, the kind of quiet that felt deliberate, as if sound itself bowed before its presence. Tracks that had not been there before would lay themselves down, glimmering with stardust, cradling the shimmering carriages that drifted as if weightless. Its windows glowed softly with a light that seemed to flicker with memories, and the door, brass-handled and ornate, would sigh open with the gentlest of clicks, as if beckoning. It waited, patient and unhurried, for those whose hearts dared to believe, for those whose wishes still lingered like unspoken prayers in the silence of night. On the evening that Eloan first saw the train, she had been wandering the hillside, her coat pulled tight against the chill that crept up from the valley. The world was hushed, blanketed in that peculiar stillness that came after the wind had settled and before the first morning bird dared to call. She had heard the tales before, of course, whispers shared by candlelight in the village square, half-murmurs traded like secrets. But tales were just tales, weren't they? Even the kind that sent shivers up one's spine. Yet there it was. Softly, like the glow of fireflies scattered upon the breeze, she saw the first glimmer flicker at the horizon. Her breath caught, and her hands stilled against the wool of her coat. It was faint at first, a mere spark at the edge of sight, but it grew, unfolding in waves of light that rippled toward her. She stepped forward, the grass whispering against her boots, heart thudding with that peculiar blend of hope and disbelief. Tracks, silver and glimmering, wound their way over the hillside, carving a path from nowhere, leading directly to her. She hesitated, breath misting before her lips, before curiosity and wonder tugged her forward. Her hand reached out, almost without thinking, and the door of the train swung open with a whispering sigh, exhaling warmth and light. Eloan stood there for a heartbeat, the night pressing close around her, the doorway shimmering with golden light. Then, with a breath as soft as a wish, she stepped inside. The interior of the starbound express was nothing like Eloan had imagined, though she hadn't quite known what to expect. Warm light pooled from crystal chandeliers that hung from ceilings painted with constellations, each star twinkling faintly as if caught in a delicate dance. Soft velvet seats, deep and inviting, lined the carriage, while brass fixtures gleamed with a soft, otherworldly glow. The windows stretched tall and arched, framed in polished mahogany, and through them, she could see the world stretching away, fading into mist and shadow. A soft hum filled the space, like the whisper of distant waves, and as she stepped forward, the train's door closed with a gentle sigh, sealing her in a cocoon of quiet. Eloan hesitated, fingertips brushing the edge of a seat, before she moved to sit, sinking into the plush cushion that embraced her with unexpected warmth. It felt as if the very air shimmered with possibility, thick with the magic of things just on the edge of belief. Across from her, a gentleman with silver hair and eyes like polished onyx tipped his hat, nodding in greeting. His coat was trimmed with silver thread that caught the light as if it were woven with stars. Eloan returned the nod, words caught somewhere between her thoughts and her tongue. The man simply smiled, as if accustomed to such wonder. "It's your first time on the express, I gather?" he asked, his voice as smooth as the train's whispering hum. Eloan managed a nod. I suppose it is." "Then you're in for quite a journey," he said, his gaze flickering to the windows where stars now streamed by, glimmering like scattered fireflies. The starbound express never takes the same path twice. It follows dreams, you see. Wishes yet unspoken. A soft shiver traced down Eloan's spine, though it was not fear that stirred her, but something else, something fragile and beautiful, like the first breath of dawn. The train began to move, soundlessly at first, as if gliding upon the fabric of the night itself. Stars streaked past the windows in delicate trails, painting the glass with ribbons of light. Eloan leaned closer, fingertips grazing the cool pane, watching as constellations she had only ever glimpsed in books drifted by, Orion, Cassiopeia, and others she did not recognize, sparkling with ageless mystery. "There's something special about the stars, don't you think?" the gentleman mused, his eyes never leaving the horizon of light. "They hold secrets older than time. And sometimes," he paused, the flicker of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "Sometimes they share them." Eloan turned to him, curiosity blooming in her eyes. "And have you heard them speak?" she asked softly. "Oh, now and then," he replied with a glimmer in his gaze. "When the journey is just right." Outside, the stars continued their slow dance, and the train pressed on through the night, smooth and unhurried, like a whisper upon the edge of a dream. Eloan settled back into her seat, eyes still fixed on the window where stars streamed by in ribbons of silver light. The train moved as if gliding upon threads of moonlight, unbound by the weight of the earth. She watched as nebulae bloomed in distant swirls of color, pale lavender and deep indigo, streaked with hints of silver. It was like watching dreams blossom in the night, delicate and infinite. The gentleman across from her sat quietly, hands folded over the silver trim of his coat. His gaze flickered occasionally to her, a gentle smile playing at his lips, but he did not speak. Outside, constellations swept by, and Eloan caught glimpses of places she'd only ever read about in tales, the arch of eternal light, the whispering sea, and something that looked like the edge of dawn stretched endlessly along the horizon. When she finally turned to him, her voice was soft, threaded with wonder. "Where does it go?" she asked. "The train, where does it end?" He leaned back slightly, as if considering her question with the weight it deserved. "Wherever it's meant to," he replied simply. "It finds its own path. Sometimes it follows wishes, other times, it drifts through dreams not yet dreamt." His gaze softened. "And sometimes, it takes you to the place you've longed for, even if you didn't know it existed." Eloan blinked, the words sinking into her like the last notes of a lullaby. "But how do you know where you're meant to go?" He smiled, eyes glimmering like the stardust that shimmered outside the window. "You don't," he said gently. "But the express does." The gentleman leaned back, his gaze softening. "This isn't just a journey through the stars," he began, his voice a whisper beneath the hum of the express. "It's a journey through moments left behind." Eloan's brows knit together gently, curiosity sparking in her gaze. "Moments, left behind," she echoed, her voice as soft as the glow spilling through the windows. He nodded, hands clasped neatly on his lap. "Some say the express finds those who have lost their way, not in the physical sense, but in the heart. It drifts through what could have been and what still might be, weaving paths between wishes left unspoken and dreams half forgotten." He paused, eyes flickering with something almost like memory. "Sometimes it takes you back, so you can find your way forward." Eloan leaned back, her mind dancing with thoughts and possibilities. She could feel it, an odd, gentle pull, like the whisper of a melody she had once known but forgotten. "And you?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. "Where is it taking you?" He smiled, and for the briefest of moments, it seemed as though his eyes held entire galaxies. "Wherever I need to be," he replied, and the silence that followed felt like the pause between heartbeats. The train glided on, smooth and steady, weaving through the stars as if it were stitching constellations back together. Outside, the universe stretched on, infinite and glittering, and Eloan found herself drifting, her heart lighter, her thoughts softer, as if the very rhythm of the train had lulled her into some sweet, unhurried dream. Stars rippled past the glass, their light shimmering like distant whispers, and Eloan watched in silence, captivated by the endless stretch of constellations. Occasionally, a flicker of movement caught her eye, shadows that seemed to dance among the stars, fading as quickly as they appeared. She leaned closer, fingertips brushing the cool pane, but the shapes vanished before she could be certain of what she'd seen. "What are they?" she asked softly, eyes still fixed on the horizon of stars. The gentleman followed her gaze, his expression gentle and knowing. "Echoes," he replied. "Traces of those who have traveled before us, their memories drift through the night, caught like reflections on water." Eloan's breath caught, her mind conjuring images of travelers she would never know, their hopes and dreams floating somewhere out there among the constellations. "Does everyone leave an echo?" she asked. "Not everyone," he replied, voice softening. "Only those whose dreams linger. Wishes unfulfilled, or moments that held too much weight to fade completely." His eyes flickered with something distant, a memory perhaps, before he straightened, the wistfulness smoothing away. Outside, the stars continued their dance, weaving through the black velvet of the sky. Eloan sat back, feeling the train's hum settle into her bones, its rhythm like a heartbeat steady and calm. She watched the stars flicker and fade, and for a moment, she wondered if her own thoughts, her own dreams, might leave traces like that someday, rippling through the night long after she was gone. Time flowed strangely aboard the starbound express. There were no clocks, no ticking hands to mark the hours, only the steady whisper of stars sliding past the windows. Eloan had no idea how long she had been traveling. The air felt heavy with dreams, and each breath she took seemed to slow her heartbeat to the train's rhythm. The gentleman across from her smiled, watching her gaze drift from window to window. "Time is different here," he said, as if reading her thoughts. "It's not quite linear. More fluid." He traced a pattern on the table between them, his fingers leaving shimmering trails of light that glowed briefly before fading. Eloan watched with wide eyes. "Where does it go?" she asked. "The time that slips away here." He looked up, eyes gleaming with something soft and secretive. "It waits," he replied simply. "Moments don't vanish, they just rest, waiting to be remembered." His smile grew wistful. "That's part of the journey, you know. Sometimes, the express takes you back, so you can find those moments again." Eloan felt the air shift slightly, a whisper of coolness that brushed past her cheek like a sigh. She turned back to the window and watched as the stars stretched on endlessly. Somewhere deep within her, a tiny flicker of understanding began to glow, soft and hesitant, but growing with each heartbeat. As the train pressed on, Eloan found herself drawn to the windows, mesmerized by the stars that flowed past like rivers of light. It was as if the train itself wove between threads of starlight, stitching its path across the fabric of the universe. She could feel the hum of it beneath her fingertips when she brushed the glass, a soft vibration that pulsed with the steady rhythm of the journey. The gentleman watched her with quiet fondness, his gaze soft and patient. "You can feel it, can't you?" he asked, voice low and gentle. Eloan turned to him, eyes wide with wonder. "It's alive," she whispered. "The train, it's alive." His smile deepened, the kind that spoke of many lifetimes of understanding. "In a way, yes. It listens, it knows. Every whisper, every wish left unspoken, it carries them." His eyes glimmered with a light that seemed almost reflective, like he held a bit of that starlight within him. "And sometimes, if you listen closely, it whispers back." Eloan blinked, her gaze returning to the window. She pressed her palm to the glass, feeling the hum beneath her fingertips grow warmer, almost familiar. For a fleeting moment, she thought she heard something, a whisper of her name, feather-light and distant, trailing off into the stars. She gasped softly, pulling her hand back, and the whisper faded into silence. The gentleman said nothing, but his smile lingered, patient and kind. Outside, the stars stretched on endlessly, shimmering with the light of 1,000 dreams, and the train continued its journey, steady and unhurried. Time, as it moved upon the starbound express, felt more like a suggestion than a rule. There were no clocks to count the hours, no sun to mark the day. Only the soft glow of the stars and the gentle hum of the train as it drifted through the tapestry of the universe. Eloan's gaze fell upon the aisle stretching down the length of the carriage. She had not yet explored it, curiosity had been bubbling up within her since she first stepped aboard. "Are there more passengers?" she asked softly, turning to the gentleman. "Oh yes," he replied with a nod. "Though some are not always visible. They board and depart at different points. You may see them when the time is right." His smile turned slightly mysterious, as if he knew far more than he would say. Eloan hesitated, but her curiosity pulled her to her feet. The gentleman merely inclined his head, gesturing for her to go on. "The train welcomes discovery," he murmured. "Go on, child. Let it show you what it will." She walked slowly down the aisle, her footsteps muffled by the thick, velvet carpet beneath her. Doors stretched out before her on either side, each with delicate brass handles that glimmered faintly in the soft light. She reached out and brushed her fingers over one, feeling warmth spread through her palm. With a breath of courage, she turned the handle and pushed it open. Beyond the door was not another carriage, but something altogether different, an endless field of stars, stretching out like an ocean of light. She stepped forward, feeling her breath catch as the very floor beneath her shimmered with stardust, stretching out into infinity. For a moment, she stood there, caught between disbelief and wonder, the stars glimmering beneath her feet. Eloan stood at the edge of starlight, her breath a whisper against the vastness before her. The field of stars stretched infinitely, shimmering beneath her feet as if she were walking upon the very fabric of the night sky. She took a tentative step forward, feeling the gentle hum of the universe beneath her soles, soft and alive, like the heartbeat of the world itself. Ahead of her, lights flickered, soft, pulsing glows that seemed to sway with a rhythm all their own. She moved toward them, the stardust beneath her swirling gently with each step. As she neared, she saw they were lanterns, floating gracefully, suspended in the air without string or wire, their light warm and familiar. Eloan reached out, fingertips brushing the edge of one, and it flickered softly in response. Within its glass walls, images began to unfold, like memories stirred from slumber. She watched, breathless, as scenes played out, glimpses of her own life, moments long past, the first time she had seen the ocean, its waves glittering like liquid silver, the evenings she had spent reading by candlelight, her imagination drifting far beyond the borders of the page. Her hand moved to another lantern, its glow brightening beneath her touch. Inside, she saw herself beneath the willow tree at the edge of the village, the one that had always whispered when the wind blew through its branches. She had gone there often as a child, dreaming of adventures and faraway places, her heart always longing for more. A soft tear slipped from the corner of her eye, though she did not know if it was sadness or joy that pulled it from her. Perhaps both, woven together in that tender way memories hold. She turned back, and there, standing patiently at the doorway, was the gentleman, his eyes warm and knowing. "It remembers," he said softly, his voice drifting to her across the starlit space. "All of it. Every dream, every whisper of hope, it remembers." Eloan stepped back from the lanterns, her heart full and aching with the weight of memories. The stardust beneath her shimmered as she returned to the doorway, her gaze still lingering on the field of light stretching endlessly into the horizon. The gentleman held out his hand, and she took it, the warmth of his grasp steady and reassuring. As she stepped back into the carriage, the door closed behind her with the faintest whisper, and the hum of the train resumed its gentle rhythm. She sank back into her seat, the velvet cushions cradling her softly. The gentleman settled across from her, his eyes shining with that same soft light. "What was that place?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. He smiled, folding his hands in his lap. "That is where the express gathers what has been left behind," he replied. "Dreams forgotten, wishes unspoken, moments never lived. It holds them, keeps them safe, until they are remembered." Eloan's eyes drifted back to the window, where stars once again streamed by in shimmering trails. The ache in her heart softened, replaced by a warmth that bloomed slowly, like dawn unfolding over the hills. "And where are we going now?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. The gentleman's smile deepened. "Where you are meant to be," he replied gently. Outside, the stars grew brighter, their light spilling into the carriage like silver rain. Eloan closed her eyes, feeling the hum of the train rock her into stillness. The star-bound express pressed on, gliding between threads of moonlight and whispers of dreams, carrying its passengers to places long imagined, to wishes long forgotten, and perhaps, to the edges of forever. In a quiet town, a seamstress weaves silver thread that mends not just fabric, but hearts. When a musician arrives with a broken melody, magic begins to stir. In a quiet town nestled between rolling hills and mist-covered valleys, there lived a seamstress named Marin. Her shop stood at the edge of the cobblestone square, its windows always aglow with soft candlelight, casting long shadows that danced against the stone walls at dusk. People from the village spoke of her skills with reverence. Her hands were nimble, her stitches impossibly fine, and her threads never seemed to fray or break. But it was her silver thread that captured whispers and wonder. No one quite knew where she had found it. Some said it had been a gift from an elder who wandered through the town long ago, others whispered it had been spun from moonlight itself. The thread shimmered with a light of its own, catching even the faintest glimmer of sunlight and holding it, as if reluctant to let it go. Marin used it sparingly, for it was not an ordinary thread. It did not simply mend cloth, it mended memories, wove dreams back together, and sometimes, if the need was great enough, it healed the hearts of those who wore her creations. Her shop was modest, lined with shelves of neatly folded fabrics and walls hung with patterns and designs, all meticulously arranged. The front window always displayed a single garment, sewn with such care that passers-by would pause to admire its delicate beauty. But it was the silver thread they came for, the way it glimmered at the seams, catching light like dewdrops at dawn. Marin kept the spool of it locked in a small wooden box beneath her workbench, and she only brought it out for those who truly needed it. A farmer who had lost his wife would leave with a coat stitched in silver, the memories of her laughter woven into its lining. A mother with a broken heart would leave with a shawl that whispered of hope when the wind touched its edges. Marin asked for nothing in return, only that they cherish what was mended. One misty evening, as twilight settled gently over the town, Marin was closing up her shop when the bell above the door tinkled softly. She looked up to see a figure standing in the doorway, a young man with eyes like storm-tossed seas and a violin case slung over his shoulder. His coat was frayed at the cuffs, it seems worn thin from years of wandering, and there was a sadness in his eyes that seemed too heavy for one heart alone. Marin paused, her hands resting lightly on the counter. "You're out late," she said softly, her voice carrying the warmth of candlelight. He stepped forward, the wooden floorboard sighing beneath his boots. I heard you mend things," he replied, his voice threaded with both hope and uncertainty. "Not just clothes, but other things." Marin regarded him carefully, her gaze gentle. "Sometimes," she said simply. "If the need is true." He nodded, unslinging the violin case and setting it gently on the counter. His hands lingered on its surface, fingers brushing over the worn wood. "It was my mother's," he whispered, barely louder than the settling dust. "It used to sing, now it just weeps." Marin's eyes softened, and she reached out to touch the case, her fingers brushing the worn leather. "Some things aren't broken," she murmured. "Just waiting to be heard." Without another word, she turned and fetched the wooden box from beneath her workbench. She placed it on the counter, the latch clicking softly as she opened it. Inside, the spool of silver thread glimmered faintly in the candlelight, its light curling softly as if stirred by her touch. The young man watched, his breath catching as Marin unwound a length of it, her hands delicate and practiced. "Can you fix it?" he asked, his voice laced with a fragile hope. Marin smiled, a gentle thing that carried the weight of many untold stories. "I can try," she replied. Marin set to work, her hands moving with a grace that seemed almost ethereal. She took the violin gently from its case, her fingertips grazing its worn wood. It shivered beneath her touch, as if recognizing the warmth of her hands. The young man stood silently across the counter, his gaze fixed on her movements, hope flickering in his eyes like the light of a faraway star. She threaded her needle with the silver thread, its light catching on the candle flames and scattering across the walls in delicate ribbons. As she began to stitch, the room grew quiet, not the silence of emptiness, but the kind that holds its breath, waiting. Marin's hands moved deftly, weaving the silver thread through the seams of the violin, tracing the lines where time and sorrow had worn it thin. With each pass of the needle, the thread shimmered and pulsed, binding not just the wood but something deeper, something intangible. Marin's eyes shone with concentration, her fingers working with tender care. Outside, the mist had settled low over the streets, muffling the distant sounds of the town and wrapping the shop in a cocoon of stillness. The young man watched, hardly daring to breathe. He had not touched the violin for months, afraid that even the softest stroke of its strings would only call forth silence or, worse, the ghost of a song too broken to remember. But here, under the seamstress's hands, it looked different, whole, somehow, as if the music was simply waiting, tucked beneath its wooden ribs, ready to be heard again. Finally, Marin tied off the last stitch and set her needle down. She ran her fingertips along the silver thread, whispering something soft, too quiet to hear, yet the air seemed to shiver in response. She looked up and nodded to the young man, her eyes gentle. "Go on," she said softly. "Play it." His hands trembled slightly as he reached out, cradling the violin in his arms like something precious, something fragile. The silver thread shimmered faintly where it wound through the wood, catching the candlelight in delicate patterns. He took a breath, slow and steady, and drew the bow from its place within the case, its curve worn smooth from years of practice and longing. Marin stepped back, her hands folded neatly before her, watching with eyes that seemed to catch every flicker of light, every whisper of sound. The young man positioned the violin beneath his chin, his fingers settling instinctively along the neck, and for a moment, he closed his eyes. The room grew still, the silence holding its breath. Then, with the gentlest pull of the bow, the first note bloomed in the room, soft and fragile, like dawn spilling over a hillside. It wavered slightly, then grew stronger, richer, filling the tiny shop with a melody that shimmered inside. The silver thread pulsed faintly, casting a soft glow along the seams of the violin as if breathing in time with the music. The young man's eyes fluttered open, disbelief and wonder sparking in his gaze. He played another note, then another, and the sound poured forth like water from a spring, clear and unbroken. Marin watched, her smile gentle and knowing, as the song filled every corner of the room, curling around the shelves of fabric, drifting out through the cracks in the windows. For a moment, it was as if the world itself paused to listen. The mist outside hung heavy and still, the candle flames danced quietly, and even the dust motes in the air seemed to shimmer in rhythm with the song. The young man's eyes glistened with unspoken gratitude, his hands steady as they coaxed the melody from the strings. When the final note drifted into silence, the room seemed to exhale, the stillness settling back into place. The young man looked up at Marin, his voice breaking just slightly. "I don't understand, how did you?" Marin only smiled, her hands resting lightly on the counter. "Some things only need mending," she said softly. "Even music." The young man stood in silence, his hands still cradling the violin, the last echoes of the melody lingering like whispers in the air. Marin watched him with a gentle smile, her eyes reflecting the candlelight with a warmth that seemed almost otherworldly. He looked down at the instrument in his hands, the silver thread glimmering faintly where it had been stitched, binding the wood back together as if time itself had been rewound. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. His fingertips brushed the seams where Marin's hands had worked their quiet magic. "It hasn't sounded like that since she was still here." Marin only nodded, her gaze softening. "Music has a way of holding memories," she replied gently. "Sometimes, it just needs a little help finding its way back." The young man's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but he blinked them back, straightening his shoulders. "What do I owe you?" he asked, his hands moving instinctively to his pockets. But Marin shook her head, a soft smile playing at her lips. "Nothing," she said simply. "Music mended is payment enough." He looked as though he wanted to argue, to insist on repaying her kindness, but something in her gaze softened his expression. He nodded instead, gratitude shining in his eyes, and gently placed the violin back in its case. Marin watched as he secured the latches, his hands careful and reverent. Before he left, he paused at the door, glancing back at her one last time. "Will it last?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marin's smile grew wistful, her eyes glimmering with quiet understanding. "As long as the music does," she replied. With that, the door swung shut behind him, the bell above it tinkling softly. Marin watched him disappear into the misty twilight, his silhouette blending with the shadows, the violin case cradled protectively in his hands. The days flowed quietly after that, the rhythm of the village returning to its gentle hum. Marin's shop remained its usual haven of candlelight and soft whispers, with the occasional traveler stopping by for mending or a gentle word. The silver thread stayed locked away in its wooden box, nestled safely beneath her workbench, waiting for the next time it would be needed. It was nearly a fortnight later when the young man returned. Marin saw him through the window first, his coat still frayed but his steps lighter, more assured. He carried the violin case with the same careful grace, but there was something different about him, a brightness to his eyes, a quiet confidence that had not been there before. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside, and Marin looked up from her stitching, her hands pausing mid-motion. "Back again?" she asked, her voice soft with familiarity. He nodded, setting the case on the counter and unclasping its latches. "I've been playing every evening," he said, his voice carrying a note of wonder. "The sound is stronger now, clearer. People are starting to gather in the square when I play. They listen." Marin's smile deepened, her eyes warm with understanding. "Music has a way of finding its place," she replied. "Especially when it's meant to be heard." He hesitated for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He set it before her, unwrapping it carefully to reveal a small, polished wooden charm, a violin, carved with delicate precision. "I made it," he said softly, almost shyly. "For you. A thank you, for everything." Marin picked it up, her fingertips brushing over the smooth surface, the strings etched with tiny, careful lines. She held it in her hands for a long moment before meeting his gaze. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." The young man smiled, and for a moment, the room seemed to glow just a little brighter, the silver thread tucked away beneath the counter humming softly, as if pleased. As the days stretched into weeks, the town began to change in small, almost imperceptible ways. Marin would hear whispers in the marketplace, how the music from the square lingered long after the young man played, how it seemed to brighten the air, lifting spirits and softening hearts. Shopkeepers left their doors open when he played, letting the melody drift through the streets. Children would pause in their games to listen, their eyes wide with wonder, as if each note held a secret only they could understand. Marin smiled quietly to herself each time she heard it. The silver thread had done its work well, it had not simply mended the violin, it had woven its magic into the music itself. There were moments, especially in the early evening when twilight settled over the cobblestones, that Marin would pause by her window, listening as the soft strains of melody drifted through the open air. It curled around lampposts, shimmered across puddles from afternoon rain, and wrapped itself around the hearts of those who listened. One evening, as the sky deepened into hues of violet and amber, Marin was sweeping her shop floor when the familiar tinkle of the bell announced a visitor. She looked up to see the young man standing there, his violin case at his side and a smile that spoke of something new. "I have something to show you," he said, his voice steady and warm. Marin set the broom aside and stepped out from behind the counter. He gestured toward the door, and she followed him out into the coolness of the evening. The streets were softly lit, the lamps flickering with golden light, and a hush had settled over the town as if it, too, were waiting. He led her through the winding cobblestone paths, past rows of shops now shuttered for the night, and toward the square. The air was crisp, tinged with the faintest trace of winter's approach, and Marin's breath puffed softly before her. When they reached the square, she paused, her eyes widening with quiet surprise. There, gathered in a wide circle around the fountain, were townsfolk of all ages, children perched on stone steps, elders wrapped in blankets, families leaning close together, their eyes fixed on the center where a small wooden platform had been placed. Candles flickered gently around its edge, their flames steady despite the occasional whisper of wind. The young man smiled at her surprise. "They've been coming every evening," he explained softly. "At first, it was just a few, then more. They said the music makes them feel," he paused, searching for the right word. "Whole," he finished, his eyes gleaming with something tender and bright. Marin watched as he stepped forward, mounting the wooden platform with practiced grace. He unclasped the violin case, lifting the instrument free with hands that were now steady, confident. He glanced back at her, his smile lingering. "Will you stay?" he asked. She nodded, finding her place along the edge of the circle, her hands folded neatly before her. He raised the violin to his chin, the bow poised with the grace of a whisper, and with a breath as soft as dawn, he began to play. The music poured forth, full and shimmering, curling through the air like ribbons of light. Marin felt it settle around her shoulders, gentle and familiar, and she smiled, knowing that the silver thread had not just mended the violin, it had mended him, too. The music filled the square, its notes weaving gently through the evening air. Marin stood quietly at the edge of the gathering, her hands clasped before her, watching as the young man played with eyes closed and heart open. His fingers danced along the strings, coaxing melodies that seemed to shimmer with light, the silver thread glimmering faintly where it ran through the seams of the violin. Around the square, townsfolk listened with rapt attention. Some swayed softly where they stood, eyes closed as if the music carried them somewhere distant and beautiful. Children sat cross-legged on the stone path, their eyes wide and bright, the wonder in their expressions unguarded and pure. Even the elders, those whose eyes had long grown weary with age, sat with softened gazes, their hands folded neatly in their laps as the music curled around them like the softest whisper of dawn. As the final note drifted into silence, the square seemed to exhale, the hush stretching long and tender before applause began, soft at first, then growing, swelling like a tide. The young man bowed his head, a blush coloring his cheeks, but the smile that played upon his lips spoke of something deeper than mere joy. Marin watched him from the shadows, her heart warmed by the sight, and she knew that whatever wound had been stitched together by her silver thread had truly healed. As the crowd began to disperse, Marin stepped forward, her footsteps soft against the cobblestones. He saw her approach and his smile brightened, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You came," he said simply. Marin returned the smile, her eyes kind. "I wouldn't have missed it." The young man set the violin gently back into its case, his hands lingering on its surface as if reluctant to let it go. "I don't know how to thank you," he murmured, his voice threaded with sincerity. "For this, for everything." Marin shook her head, her expression gentle and unwavering. "There is no need," she replied. "It was always your music, I simply mended what was already there." He nodded, though his gaze remained thoughtful. "It's more than that," he said after a moment, his fingers brushing the seam where the silver thread shimmered faintly. "It's like, it remembers." He hesitated, searching for the words. "When I play, it's like I can hear her again. Like she's still here, with me." Marin's smile deepened, her eyes softening with understanding. "Some things are never truly lost," she said. "They are simply waiting to be heard." The young man straightened, the weight that had once bowed his shoulders seeming to have vanished. He clasped the case shut, his movements filled with a newfound grace. "Will I see you again?" he asked, his gaze bright with hope. Marin only smiled, her eyes twinkling with something that felt like stardust. "Music has a way of finding its own path," she replied gently. "And I think yours is only just beginning." He left then, with a nod and a smile, his footsteps light against the cobblestones as he disappeared into the misty light of dawn. Marin stood at the doorway of her shop, watching until he vanished from view, the echoes of his music still lingering in the air. The silver thread lay quietly in its wooden box, glimmering softly as if it, too, was pleased with what had been restored. The days drifted on, softened by the gentle hum of autumn turning its leaves to gold. Marin continued her work in the little shop by the square, mending garments, stitching together memories, and listening as the faint strains of violin music occasionally floated through the cobblestone paths. The young man had grown into his place in the town, playing in the square most evenings, his melodies curling through the streets like threads of light. People paused to listen, their faces softening with quiet wonder, their hearts somehow lighter for it. Marin would often pause by her window, her hands resting on the sill as she listened. There was something familiar in the music now, a fullness that had not been there before, a kind of completion. It was as if the silver thread had not only mended the violin, but had woven something new into its strings, something that lingered in each note and left traces of hope in its wake. One misty morning, as Marin was setting out bolts of fabric in her shop, the bell above her door tinkled softly. She looked up to find a woman standing there, her hands folded neatly before her, a shawl draped over her shoulders that shimmered faintly with silver. Marin recognized her at once, an old friend, someone she had once stitched a garment for, long ago. "It's lasted all these years," the woman said, her eyes bright with memory. "That shawl you made me, it still whispers when the wind touches it. I thought it might fade, but it hasn't." Marin smiled gently, her fingers brushing the edge of the fabric she held. "Magic has a way of lingering," she replied. "Especially when it's sewn with purpose." The woman nodded, her smile softening. "I just wanted you to know. I still wear it every winter. It still feels like home." Marin's heart warmed, and she inclined her head. "That's all I could hope for." The seasons continued their patient turning, and Marin's shop remained a quiet haven at the edge of the square. The silver thread stayed tucked away, brought out only when truly needed, its light steady and unyielding. Marin stitched coats for the lost, scarves for the lonely, and on rare occasions, she would mend more than just fabric, she would mend the things that could not be seen, the soft threads of longing and memory that lingered in the heart. The young man continued to play each evening, his music growing richer and deeper with each passing year. People began to travel from distant villages to hear him, their footsteps whispering along the cobblestones, drawn by the promise of something unspoken, something that stirred beneath the surface of his melodies. He always played with his eyes closed, his fingers dancing along the silver-seamed violin, and those who listened swore they could hear echoes of dreams long forgotten, whispers of love, and the soft sigh of moonlight on distant hills. Marin watched it all with quiet pride, her hands never still, always stitching, always mending. On rare nights, when the moon hung low and silver over the hills, she would pause by her window, listening as his music drifted through the quiet streets, soft as a lullaby. And in her little shop, the silver thread gleamed quietly from its wooden box, patient and unhurried, waiting for the next story to be mended, for the next thread of memory to be stitched back into place. And so, the town went on, its cobblestones whispering beneath the weight of footsteps and melodies, and the seamstress at the edge of the square continued her work, softly, gently, as if every stitch were a whisper, and every thread a promise. Deep in the whispering woods lies a library where twilight never ends. Its shelves hold memories, some lived, some yet to be. For Adeline, the journey is just beginning. Deep in the heart of the ancient whispering woods, where twilight lingers long after the sun has set, there stands a library unlike any other. Its spires stretch toward a sky caught in eternal dusk, painted in hues of violet and amber, with stars just beginning to flicker awake. The library is hidden well, wrapped in mist and shadow, visible only to those who truly seek it, or those who are truly lost. Its doors are made of polished mahogany, etched with symbols too old to name, their edges glimmering faintly as if traced with the last light of day. Vines curl along its walls, soft and silver, their leaves whispering like gentle sighs as the wind brushes past. No one remembers who built it, nor when it first appeared, only that it has always been there, waiting. Inside, the library is vast and winding, its shelves stretching far beyond what the eye can see. The air is thick with the scent of parchment and candle wax, warm and lingering, as if each breath is an invitation to remember. Lanterns hang suspended from invisible threads, their light flickering softly, casting shadows that seem to move just slightly when no one is watching. The books that line the shelves are not like those found in the villages nearby. Their spines are bound in deep shades of indigo and midnight blue, some laced with silver thread that glows faintly in the half-light. There are no titles upon their covers, only symbols, etched with the delicate hand of someone who knew far more than words could convey. It is said that each book holds not a story, but a memory, a fragment of time preserved in ink and whispering pages. Travelers who stumble upon the library rarely speak of it afterward. Some say it is because the memories are too precious, too fragile to share, others say it is because once you enter, a part of you never truly leaves. One evening, when the air hung thick with the hush of autumn leaves and the sky shimmered with the promise of first frost, a young woman named Adeline found herself wandering the edge of the whispering woods. She had been walking for hours, her footsteps light and unhurried, the path beneath her feet soft with moss and fallen petals. There had been no reason for her wandering, only a restlessness she could not name, a feeling that something was waiting just beyond the edges of what she could see. Her cloak trailed behind her, brushing against fern and bramble, and the mist clung to her steps as if reluctant to let her go. She paused at the edge of a grove, her breath misting in the cool air, and that was when she saw it, a glimmer between the trees, faint and shimmering, as if moonlight had pooled in the space between shadows. Adeline stepped forward, her heart fluttering with something like wonder. The path wound gently ahead, the light growing stronger with each step, until the trees parted and she saw it, the library of eternal dusk, its towers stretching into the twilight, its doors aglow with a soft, beckoning light. Her breath caught in her throat. She had heard whispers of such a place, a library where time unraveled softly, where memories rested on dust-kissed shelves, waiting to be found. Her hand drifted to her side, where the leather-bound journal she carried lay nestled in her satchel. She had filled it with fragments of dreams and stories that lingered just beyond the edges of her waking mind. Without quite knowing why, Adeline stepped forward. Her hand rested upon the mahogany doors, warm and polished beneath her fingertips. For a moment, she hesitated, the stillness pressing close, as if waiting for her decision. Then, with a breath as soft as a wish, she pushed them open. The doors swung wide without a whisper of protest, and she stepped inside, the light of eternal dusk spilling across her shoulders like a welcome. The scent of old paper and candlelight washed over her, and she knew, without knowing how, that she had been meant to find this place. The doors closed behind her with a whisper, sealing the world outside into silence. Adeline took a breath, the air thick with the scent of aged parchment and flickering candlelight. Before her stretched rows upon rows of shelves, each one filled with books that shimmered softly in the eternal dusk. Their spines glimmered with symbols she did not recognize, patterns that seemed to shift and glow as she walked past. She stepped forward, her fingertips brushing the edges of the shelves. The wood felt warm beneath her touch, smooth and polished as if untouched by time. Lanterns floated above, their light soft and golden, casting long shadows that stretched and sighed with the movement of her footsteps. There was no dust on the shelves, no whisper of age, only the steady hum of silence, thick and unbroken. Adeline paused at one of the shelves, her gaze settling on a book bound in deep blue leather, its cover laced with silver threads that pulsed faintly as she reached for it. Her fingers hovered just above its surface, and for a moment, she hesitated. There was a pull, soft and insistent, that urged her to take it, as if the book itself was calling her name. She drew it from the shelf, its weight surprising in her hands. The silver threads along its spine shimmered gently, catching the light of the lanterns as if dancing to a rhythm only it could hear. Adeline ran her fingertips along its surface, feeling the smoothness of the leather, the faint hum of energy beneath her touch. Without another moment's hesitation, she opened it. The pages were smooth and heavy, their edges lined with silver leaf. But there were no words, only images, soft and fleeting, shimmering just beneath the surface of the paper. She leaned closer, her breath catching as the images began to move, flickering like memories stirred awake. She saw glimpses of a meadow dappled with sunlight, laughter echoing across tall grasses, a whisper of someone's voice, warm and familiar. Her heart fluttered, and she turned the page, the images shifting with a softness that felt like a dream. She saw the edge of a riverbank, moonlight shimmering on the surface, and a figure standing alone, their back turned, the air around them heavy with longing. Adeline's fingers trembled as she closed the book, its weight settling back into her palms with a gentle sigh. Somehow, she knew, these were not stories written by another's hand. They were memories. Adeline wandered deeper into the library, the book still cradled in her hands, its warmth seeping into her palms as if it held the remnants of the moments it carried. The lanterns above flickered softly, their light stretching long shadows that seemed to ripple with her passing. The shelves stretched endlessly, winding around corners that led to more shelves, each filled with books that glimmered faintly in the half-light. She paused at a narrow corridor lined with shelves carved from dark walnut, their edges etched with curling patterns that shimmered in the flickering glow. The air was cool here, scented faintly with lavender and cedar, and she stepped forward with the softest breath of wonder. Her hand drifted to the spines of the books, fingertips grazing the smooth leather. Some were bound in rich emerald green, others in deep shades of indigo, and all pulsed with a gentle light when she touched them. Her heart thrummed with something she could not name, curiosity, perhaps, or maybe longing. She reached for another book, this one bound in midnight blue with a symbol etched on its cover, a crescent moon cradled within a circle of stars. It warmed beneath her fingertips, and she hesitated only a moment before pulling it from its place. When she opened it, the pages flickered and shimmered, shifting like reflections on water. A memory unfolded, soft and hazy, as if seen through layers of twilight. She saw a marketplace bathed in dusk, lanterns swaying in the breeze, voices mingling in the cool evening air. A woman stood at a stall, her hands brushing over bolts of fabric, her smile soft as she chatted with the vendor. Adeline watched, breathless, as the memory played out, tender and unhurried, and she felt a strange pang of recognition, though she could not place it. The scene shimmered and faded, and she turned the page. Another memory unfolded, a dance beneath the light of 1,000 stars, laughter carried on the wind, the soft strains of music drifting across an open field. Adeline's eyes misted as she watched, her heart swelling with something bittersweet and beautiful. She closed the book gently, her hands lingering on its cover. There were stories here, stories she had never known, memories she had never lived, yet they felt as real as her own breath. The library of eternal dusk, it seemed, did not hold just memories of those who found it. It held memories yet to be. Adeline continued her slow wander through the aisles of the library, the book with the crescent moon still tucked safely under her arm. The air around her was hushed and heavy with the scent of lavender and old paper, as if the very walls were steeped in memory. She moved with care, her footsteps muffled by thick carpets woven with patterns of stars and vines that twisted and curled underfoot. The shelves grew taller as she walked, their spines glimmering faintly in the lantern light, some whispering soft echoes as she passed. She paused before one, her fingers drifting over the leather bindings, each one warm and pulsing gently beneath her touch. She let her hand rest on a volume bound in silver gray, its surface cool and smooth, etched with swirling patterns that seemed to shift under her fingertips. A shiver ran through her, not of fear, but of familiarity, like the first touch of autumn wind after a long summer. She pulled the book from the shelf, its weight solid in her hands, and opened it to the first page. There were no words, only images, soft and flickering, like candlelight on water. She saw a garden bathed in moonlight, vines creeping up trellises of ironwork, petals blooming in shades of ivory and sapphire. A figure moved among the flowers, their hands brushing the petals as if greeting old friends. The memory shimmered, its light dancing across Adeline's hands, and for a moment she could almost feel the coolness of the garden air, the softness of petals beneath her fingertips. She turned the page, her breath catching softly. Another memory unfolded, a room filled with sunlight, dust motes dancing in the air, the smell of cinnamon and bread baking in an oven. Laughter, soft and warm, echoing through the room, though she could not see who it belonged to. Her fingers trembled slightly as she closed the book, its weight pressing into her palms. These were not her memories, she knew this, yet they felt familiar, like whispers of dreams she had forgotten. She pressed the book back onto the shelf, her heart fluttering with questions. How could memories feel like home when she had never lived them? Adeline moved deeper into the library, the light of the lanterns casting long, delicate shadows across the shelves. She ran her fingers along the spines of the books as she passed, each one warm and pulsing faintly beneath her touch. It was as if the library itself was alive, breathing gently beneath her fingertips, waiting to reveal its secrets. She rounded a corner and stopped short. Before her stretched an archway, its frame carved with symbols she did not recognize, spirals and stars, leaves curling into crescents. It was not there before, she was certain of it. But now it stood silently, its threshold shimmering faintly with silver light. Her heart whispered with both caution and curiosity. She stepped forward, her hand grazing the edge of the archway, and warmth bloomed beneath her fingertips. It felt like stepping into a breath held too long, the kind that brings relief and ache all at once. She took another step, crossing the threshold. On the other side, the light shifted, softer, deeper, like twilight stretching over distant hills. Shelves lined the walls, but these were different. They were taller, the wood darker, their edges traced with silver that glimmered as she moved past. The books here pulsed with a gentler light, as if resting in a deeper kind of slumber. At the very center of the room stood a single pedestal, upon which rested a book larger than any she had yet seen. Its cover was dark and glimmered with threads of silver and gold, woven in patterns that caught the light like whispers of stardust. Adeline stepped closer, her breath shallow and careful, and reached out to touch its surface. The moment her hand touched the cover, the room grew still. Lanterns flickered and dimmed, the shadows stretching long and languid across the floor. Adeline's breath caught, but she did not pull away. There was a hum beneath her fingertips, soft and pulsing, like the echo of a heartbeat. With gentle hands, she opened the book. Its pages shimmered with light, unfolding not words, but scenes, like watching dreams come alive beneath her fingertips. She saw paths winding through misty forests, rivers gleaming beneath silver moons, and the flicker of firelight in distant glades. And through it all, she felt something stir within her, like the first breath of dawn. Adeline watched, breathless, as the scenes flickered across the pages, each one unfurling like the petals of a flower beneath moonlight. Her fingertips brushed the edges of the parchment, and the images shimmered softly, glimpses of a river winding through mist-covered valleys, sunlight filtering through canopies of ancient trees, and a lone figure standing at the edge of a cliff, eyes cast toward the horizon. The images felt impossibly real. She could almost hear the whisper of the wind through the branches, smell the damp earth beneath her feet, and feel the brush of river mist against her cheeks. It was as though the book was not merely showing her these places, but inviting her to remember them. Yet she knew, with a whisper of sadness, that she had never walked those paths, had never traced the edges of those rivers with her fingertips. Or had she? Her heart fluttered, and she glanced around the shadowed room. The shelves stretched endlessly, lined with volumes that pulsed faintly in the dim light. It was a library of memories, but whose? Adeline looked back to the book before her, the threads of silver and gold shimmering with each flicker of the lantern light. Hesitantly, she turned another page. This time, the image that unfolded was not of distant landscapes or moonlit rivers. It was a room, warm, familiar. The walls were lined with books, their spines etched with the same silver patterns she had seen in the library. A fire crackled gently in the corner, its light dancing off polished wood floors. Adeline's breath caught. She knew this place. It was the library, this very one, but older, untouched by time. She could almost hear the whisper of the fire, smell the faint traces of cedar and lavender that lingered in the air. But there, seated by the fire, was a figure, an elderly woman with silver-threaded hair, her eyes bright and knowing, a smile playing gently on her lips. Adeline leaned closer, her fingers brushing the edge of the page. The woman looked up, her gaze meeting Adeline's through the parchment. Her smile deepened, and she raised her hand in greeting, a gesture so familiar it sent a shiver through Adeline's heart. She whispered softly, too soft to hear, but Adeline understood the shape of her lips. "Welcome home." The lanterns flickered gently overhead as Adeline pulled back, her breath coming in soft, shallow bursts. Her hands trembled as she let them fall from the book, the whisper of her fingertips leaving faint trails of silver light upon its surface. The room was hushed, as if holding its breath, the shadows stretching long and deep between the shelves. Adeline took a step back, her gaze locked on the book still resting on the pedestal, its silver threads glimmering faintly in the half-light. The words echoed in her mind, "Welcome home." But how could that be? She had never been here before. Her mind spun, searching for answers, but all she found were whispers of dreams long forgotten, memories that lingered just out of reach. Slowly, she turned away from the pedestal, her eyes tracing the rows of shelves that stretched out before her. Each one held books that shimmered and pulsed with a light of their own, like embers flickering beneath layers of ash. She moved toward them, her hands brushing the spines, feeling the hum of energy that trembled just beneath the surface. Her fingers paused over a slender volume bound in midnight blue. It thrummed softly beneath her touch, almost expectant, as if it had been waiting for her. She pulled it gently from the shelf, its weight solid and comforting in her hands. The cover bore a single symbol, an open door framed by vines and stars. Adeline's heart fluttered as she opened the book. Images unfolded before her eyes, soft, tender glimpses of places she did not know but somehow recognized. A garden bathed in moonlight, a fountain shimmering with droplets of light, and paths winding through fields of silver grass. Her fingers brushed the pages, and she felt something stir in her heart, like the soft echo of a song half remembered. These were her memories, she knew it with a certainty that took her breath away. But they were memories she had never lived, moments she had never touched. Or perhaps, she thought with a tremor of awe, moments that were yet to come. The library, it seemed, held not only the past, but the promise of what might yet be. Adeline stood in the soft glow of the lantern light, the book resting in her hands, its pages heavy with possibility. Her fingertips traced the edges of the images, each one pulsing with life, with memories she had never touched but somehow knew. She could feel them thrumming beneath her skin, a whisper of familiarity, as if the library itself was inviting her to step deeper into its embrace. She closed the book gently, the cover warm beneath her touch, and slid it back onto the shelf. The moment her hands left its surface, the light along its spine dimmed slightly, settling back into the soft hum of the room. Adeline stepped back, her eyes drifting across the countless rows that stretched out before her. How many stories did these shelves hold? How many memories, both lived and unlived, were resting here in the gentle glow of eternal dusk? Her footsteps echoed softly as she wandered further down the aisle, her hands grazing the spines of books that pulsed faintly beneath her touch. Some flickered brighter when she passed, while others stayed dormant, silent in their slumber. The air grew cooler, scented with lavender and the faintest hint of cedar, and the light above her softened, casting longer shadows that whispered against the walls. She rounded a corner and found herself standing before a door she had not seen before. Its surface was carved with delicate patterns, vines twisting into spirals, stars cradled in curling leaves. It shimmered faintly, catching the light as she approached, and for a moment she hesitated. But the whisper of her name, soft as a sigh, drifted through the stillness, urging her forward. Adeline reached out, her fingertips grazing the surface of the door. It was warm to the touch, humming faintly beneath her hand, and before she could question her own courage, she pushed it open. The door swung wide without a whisper, revealing a room bathed in twilight. It stretched far and wide, the ceiling arching high above her, its surface painted with constellations she had never seen. Stars twinkled softly against a sky caught forever in dusk, and the walls were lined with shelves that climbed high into shadow, their spines flickering with gentle light. At the very center of the room stood a solitary desk, its surface polished and smooth, and upon it rested a single book, its cover bound in deep violet, laced with silver thread that shimmered softly in the dim glow. Adeline stepped forward, her footsteps muffled by thick carpet woven with stars. Her hands hovered above the book, her breath catching as she traced its surface. It pulsed faintly beneath her touch, warm and familiar. She opened it gently, its spine sighing softly as if waking from a long rest. The pages shimmered, and there, scrawled in delicate handwriting, was her name. Adeline stared at the page, her heart fluttering softly in her chest. Her name shimmered in silver ink, curling gently across the surface of the parchment. The letters were smooth and familiar, as though they had been written by her own hand, but she knew with a whisper of certainty that she had never touched this book before. Her fingertips brushed the edge of the page, and the ink glowed faintly beneath her touch. She turned the page slowly, the parchment sighing softly as it settled back into place. Her breath caught as the images began to shimmer, soft, delicate fragments of moments she had never lived, but felt in her bones. There was a garden blooming under moonlight, petals shimmering with dew, a cobblestone path winding toward a cottage nestled beneath the arms of a great willow tree, and the flicker of candlelight dancing across a table set for two, shadows whispering against the walls as laughter curled through the air. Her eyes misted, and she turned the page once more. Another memory unfolded, her own hands reaching out, brushing the petals of a rose that glowed faintly with silver light, its leaves whispering in the breeze. She could almost feel it, the softness of the petals, the coolness of the air as it kissed her fingertips. Adeline closed the book softly, her hands lingering on its cover. Her heart ached with the softness of it, a whisper of something lost and found all at once. The room around her was silent, the lanterns flickering gently overhead, casting long shadows that stretched and sighed. She looked back toward the door she had entered, now standing slightly ajar, the soft glow of the library beyond spilling through the gap. But she did not leave. Not yet. Instead, she placed the book back on the desk, her fingertips brushing its cover one last time. It pulsed faintly, almost as if it were breathing, and Adeline felt the familiar hum travel through her fingertips, settling gently into her heart. For the first time since she entered the library, she understood, these were not just memories of things that had been, but echoes of things that could be. Possibilities, stretched across time and caught within the pages of the library. She stepped back, her gaze drifting across the room, and whispered softly into the stillness. "Show me more." The air seemed to hum in response to her whisper, a soft ripple that traveled through the room and set the lanterns flickering. Shadows danced across the shelves, stretching long and slender, curling like whispers across the walls. Adeline stepped back from the desk, her heart thrumming with something she could not name, anticipation, perhaps, or maybe destiny. The book she had touched pulsed faintly where it rested, its violet cover shimmering with silver threads that wove in delicate patterns across its surface. The light grew brighter, soft and inviting, spilling across the floor like threads of moonlight. Adeline watched, breathless, as the light stretched toward her feet, weaving intricate patterns that shimmered with every step she took. Without hesitation, she followed it. Her hands brushed against the spines of books as she walked, and they pulsed faintly in response, whispering memories she could almost hear, echoes of voices, laughter carried on the wind, the sigh of leaves rustling in distant forests. The silver light guided her deeper into the library, down winding aisles lined with shelves that seemed to stretch toward the stars. At last, she found herself before a small alcove, its walls carved with spirals and stars, its ceiling stretching high above her, glimmering with constellations that danced in slow, deliberate patterns. A single book rested on a pedestal in the center of the alcove, its surface bound in midnight blue, its edges laced with silver and gold. Adeline stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached out to touch it. The book was warm beneath her fingertips, humming gently, as if welcoming her. She opened it, the pages sighing softly, and there, inscribed in delicate handwriting, was a name she recognized, her own. Her breath caught, and she turned the page. A memory unfolded, soft and shimmering, like moonlight stretched across still water. She saw herself, standing beneath the arch of the library's entrance, her hand resting on the mahogany door. She watched as she pushed it open, stepping into the eternal dusk, her eyes wide with wonder. And then, the scene changed. She saw herself older, her hair streaked with silver, her hands still steady as they traced the edges of books that pulsed with light. Her gaze was gentle, her eyes crinkled with lines of joy and sorrow, her smile serene. She stood at the entrance of the library, its doors flung wide, and beside her were others, travelers, seekers, those whose hearts longed for stories yet untold. She welcomed them with open arms, guiding them through the aisles, whispering to the shelves that glimmered in response. Adeline closed the book softly, her hands resting on its cover. Her heart was full and heavy with understanding, with the weight of something both beautiful and inevitable. She stood there in the silence of the alcove, the lanterns flickering gently overhead, and she whispered a single word into the stillness. Yes. Time flowed differently within the library of eternal dusk. The twilight stretched unbroken, casting its gentle glow over shelves that sighed with memories and whispered with echoes of dreams. Adeline remained, as she had always been meant to. She wandered the halls, her footsteps soft and unhurried, her hands grazing the spines of books that pulsed with light at her touch. She welcomed those who found their way through the mist and the shadows, guiding them through the aisles with a knowing smile. She would listen to their stories, her eyes bright with understanding, and would place books in their hands, volumes that whispered with their own forgotten memories, or sometimes with glimpses of things yet to be. The library thrived, its shelves stretching ever onward, growing and winding with each new soul that passed through its doors. Adeline knew the way by heart now, each corner, each shadowed alcove, each spiral staircase that led to deeper rooms where stories were tucked away, waiting patiently to be found. And sometimes, late in the quiet hours when the mist curled thickly around the entrance and the lantern light flickered with soft whispers, she would pull down a book of midnight blue, its silver threads glimmering softly in her hands. She would open it to the last page, her fingertips brushing the edges of her own story, and she would smile. For in that place of eternal dusk, where time curled gently around memories and shadows stretched like whispers, Adeline had found her place, a keeper of stories, a weaver of memories, in the library that never slept. And so it remained, cradled beneath the eternal twilight, its doors waiting patiently for the next seeker to stumble upon it, for the next story to be written, and for the next heart to be mended.